Shalom, Erev Tov, good evening from Jerusalem, Israel. This is Lowell Joseph Gallen, founder of the Root and Branch Association Limited, established in New York State and God of Israel Bless America in 1981, now celebrating our 40th anniversary. I would like to welcome our viewers and listeners worldwide and our live Zoom studio audience to this evening's program and our Root and Branch Association Limited English language conference and lecture series broadcasting from Jerusalem, Israel. And now celebrating the start of our second quarter century. As I always do at the beginning of each program, Hakarat Hatov, I thank the Orthodox Union Israel Center, 22 Karen Hayasad Street, for hosting our first quarter century from January 1995 until December 2020. And especially its wonderful former educational director and founder and editor emeritus of its unique Torah Tidbits publication, Mr. Phil Chernovsky, his Eshet Chayil, woman of valor, Mrs. Tony Chernovsky, and the long-suffering Mrs. Itter Rachel Rusek, the scheduler who keeps the whole thing functioning without collapsing. I would have been carried out of a stretcher long ago. I'm glad I don't have her job. Thanks to all of you for helping us get started the first quarter century. Today is Sunday, June 13th, 2021 in the Gregorian calendar, and the third day of Tammuz 5781 in the Hebrew Israelite calendar. As I always do, I like to give historical context. On May 19th, 1943, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising came to an end. On June 5th, 1967, the miraculous Six-Day War began. On June 6th, Allied armies landed, British and American, Canadian, other forces landed at Omaha and other beaches in France to begin liberating France and Europe from the Nazi Germans. We are broadcasting from the land of Israel, city of God, Jerusalem, Hill of the Priests, Givat Hanania Abu Tur, overlooking Mount Moriah, where we believe that the third and final Israelite temple of Jerusalem will soon be under reconstruction and stand forever, as per the prophet Ezekiel's vision. Please see the biblical book of Ezekiel, chapters 40 through 48. The Root and Branch Association promotes faith in the God of Israel, who created us all, the study and practice of universal Jewish teachings within the framework of the Noahide covenant and laws. Please see Genesis chapter 9. If you are a Christian, please see Acts 15. And for all to honor God's land, Torah, and people covenants with his chosen people, Israel. And from our perspective, you have to do it now, time's up. Now, I also am adding that in my count, we are in the 92nd day of year 2 of the regenerating 5th Israelite monarchy of Daniel's vision. Please see the book of Daniel, chapter 2, verse 44, which I believe began on Rosh Chodesh Nisan a year and a bit ago. And also, I now dedicate each program in honor of my father, Lieutenant Colonel Martin Gallen, who was buried with the United States Honor Guard with full military honors on October 16th, 2018, at the age of 98, captain in World War II European Theater. So now to our program. Our speaker for this evening's program is Professor Martin Sherman, who will speak on tectonic changes in Israeli politics. He will be introduced by my longtime friend and colleague, Dr. Les Glassman. Doctor, as in dentist, you need a root canal or a crown, come to Jerusalem and see Les, he'll take care of you. Now, let's give you Les here, and he will introduce Professor Sherman. And we also want to welcome Professor Asher Matathias from Long Island, who is not only hosting a monthly show on the history of Greek Jewry through the ages, he is a Greek Jew, Zorba the Jew, but joins us for so many sessions as a panelist. Thank you, Professor Matathias. And now, Les, over to you.
Thank you, Lowell. I really appreciate it. Shabbat Tov. it's a tremendous honor and a privilege to introduce ex-Witsi, and I'll explain what that means. But Prof. Martin Sherman was born in South Africa. I'm just going to give a brief bio because your bio is so impressive and what you've achieved. And our time is limited, so I don't want to spend so much of the evening just speaking about your tremendous achievements. But you were born in South Africa, and you received a BSc degree at Wits University in physics and geology. And you came to Israel in '71, and you received the MBA in finance and a PhD in political science and international relations at Tel Aviv University. You were the first academic director of the internationally renowned Witsi Conference, and is the author of 2 books and numerous articles and policy papers on a wide range of political, diplomatic, and security issues. And Martin, I remember reading your articles in the Jerusalem Post, and I've been following you for years, and it's just such an honor. But you served for 7 years in operational capacities in the Israeli defense establishment. You were a ministerial advisor to Yitzhak Shamir's government and lectured for 20 years at Tel Aviv University in political science, international relations, and strategic studies. Prof. Dr. Martin Sherman is the founder and executive director of the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies. And I'm really proud to say that I received your newsletter. I've been receiving it for many years. And I can't wait to receive, it comes on email, in anticipation. It is so informative, it's so brilliant. And it's just such an honor and a privilege to have, first of all, an ex-Witsi, but ex-South African here giving us a talk tonight on possibly one of the most amazing political days in Israel's history. So without any further ado, we have a world-renowned expert on the subject. We are so honored and privileged to have you, Prof. And we are very, very appreciative. So without any further ado.
Well, thank you very much for that very flattering introduction. I hope I won't disappoint leaders with the expectations that you've generated with that. But you're certainly right about the significance of today. In fact, I've got behind me the television going on. The new government is supposed to be sworn in, and it's really hanging by a thread. My personal preference would be that it would not be confirmed, and that they would either send the nomination back to the Knesset. That's what happens in Israel. Perhaps I should just give your readers a brief rundown of what happens. After the elections, the president nominates someone who has the highest number of supporters amongst the Knesset members to try and put together a coalition. He has 3 weeks to do it. Sometimes if he doesn't succeed and asks for an extension, he can get a 2-week extension. Often they don't ask for the extension. And then an alternative Knesset member is nominated to try and put together a government. If he fails, then the task goes to the Knesset to find someone who can put together a coalition. And if the third attempt fails, then there'll be new elections. I think that the best outcome here would either be for the mandate to return to the Knesset or new elections being called. But as I don't decide that, the situation at the moment is that we're at the very edge of the second mandate given to Yair Lapid, who up until now was head of the opposition. And he seems to have cobbled together I think it's a really horrifying or dreadful coalition composed of bits and pieces across the political spectrum, from the supposedly hard right to the far left, and even one non-Zionist party. And we'll know soon if that party has been sworn in or not. But under the assumption that it is being sworn in, this will be a major change in Israeli politics, which is why I think the title of the talk, Tectonic Changes, is very apt. because this will be a change of government after 12 years of continuous Netanyahu incumbency, which I think have been in many ways highly successful. Now, I'm not an uncritical apologist for Netanyahu. I think he's a not unblemished premier, but he certainly in many ways has been a transformational leader of the country. He has very impressive successes across a large number of fields. Take, for instance, the economy. The GDP per capita has grown impressively, and especially if we discount the Corona period, the GDP per capita has grown impressively. I think it's climbed almost 50% since he's been in power. Israel has been admitted to the prestigious club of developing nations, the OECD, which would have been unimaginable a few years ago. GDP, in terms of GDP per capita, Israel has surpassed a number of countries, including Britain, France, Japan, New Zealand, as again, this would have been unthinkable not long ago. In terms of diplomatic triumphs, I think he managed to withstand the very inclement Obama administration without making any major concessions. Following that, he had very warm relations with both the US and Russia to this day. And Russia is extremely important given its presence in Syria and the Israeli military action against the Iranian troop buildup there. And so having this good relationship with Putin has been extremely important. He's managed to put a wedge into the somewhat inimical European Union by bringing on board the Visegrad countries, Central Europe and Eastern Europe, who basically now Israel's guarantee that punitive measures by the EU will not be taken against Israel. Israel may be, condemned, but taking practical steps against Israel will require a unilateral decision, which, given the predilections of the Central and European countries, Romania, Poland, Hungary, this I don't think is on the cards. So that's been a somewhat unheralded, but a very important accomplishment of Netanyahu. Then, of course, he's developed good relations with countries in the East, particularly India, to some degree China as well, which is involved in big infrastructure projects in Israel. So, looking back, and then of course, we have to also give him credit for Israel being the first country to emerge more or less from the COVID epidemic. And interestingly enough, his major rival in politics, Yair Lapid, was on all the major networks, basically proclaiming that Netanyahu was lying about being able to bring a vaccine, and we won't have any vaccines, and by January we'll only have a small carton of 5 vaccines, where actually, in fact, the vaccines arrived in December. So basically, Netanyahu's critics have been proved wrong on just about every field. Israel has not been isolated diplomatically, it has not been isolated economically. It's been able to operate reasonably free of any restraints in the military sphere. Under Netanyahu, there were very impressive intelligence coups. If you remember the hijacking of the Iranian nuclear archive, the mysterious explosions and fires in various installations in Iran, the assassination of the leader of their nuclear program. All these happened under Netanyahu's watch. And of course, none of these would have taken place without his knowledge and involvement. So he certainly has a great accumulation of achievements. On the other hand, I think there's certain things that he hasn't done. For instance, dealing with crime in the Arab sector, particularly in the south with the Bedouin, and the protection rackets in the north, with the rampant crime across the Arab sector. I think he didn't take full advantage of the Trump administration to build massively in Judea and Samaria across the Green Line, both cementing our presence there and bringing the cost of housing down. I think he was perhaps very slow off the mark with the reform of the judicial system, which is now coming back to bite him with all these almost patently trumped up charges against him. So that's what we have during the 12 years. What's happened now is simply because of what I think the sages called sinat chinam, baseless hatred. People have ganged up against him, not because they think they can do a better job than him, or they think they should do a different job from him, simply because they don't want him in power. And so you have this motley collection of right-wing parties, New Hope and Yamina, together with the far left and the Labour Party and Meretz, together with the non-Zionist party, with the Arab Islamists, who are going to replace Netanyahu if they're sworn in the next hour or so. It's very difficult to see how this government will function, because apart from marginal issues like moving nursery schools into the education department and discussing reforms in the public transport on the Sabbath, I find it very difficult to see how they will come to agreement on any subject, like building in Judea and Samaria, the expansion of infrastructures there, the road system, especially with the Minister of Transport elected to be elected as Mayor Abdul Khairi, who's very left-wing head of the Labour Party. So, I think we're in for a very difficult time. I don't see any of Netanyahu's rivals having the stature and international name recognition to stand up to the Biden administration and the escalating anti-Semitism in the Democratic Party. I think Netanyahu was sort of head and shoulders above all his rivals. Not that he could never be replaced, but I think at this particular critical time, with challenges like Iran, challenges in the Northern Front, what looks like a hostile Democratic Party in power in the US, I'm not sure this is a good time for on-the-job training. So basically, that's why I think the changes could be tectonic in the negative sense of the word. Liz.
All right. And Prof, and do you give, well, thank you very much for your insights. Do you give Naftali Bennett, do you think he has any chance in succeeding for a couple of months, a year maybe, till his term of office expires?
Well, his term of office is 2 years.
Yeah, then it's a rotation.
And it's a rotation with Yair Lapid. Now, look, I have a very dim view of what happened now, because Bennett swore time and time again that he would never sit in the government with Yair Lapid, not with rotation, not without rotation. He actually signed a document saying that, and this was a very serious pledge. Now, all of a sudden, he's come up with this idea that his core commitment, his core pledge was not to allow the next election, which is, of course, not true, because he never said, he never mitigated or conditioned his being against a government by Lapid on only if that will avoid an election. That was never part of his election pledges. He said categorically that he would never let Lapid become prime minister, and he's actually done that, at least in theory, because if the government lasts 2 years, then Lapid will come into power. And I think Lapid, who may be very talented in things he did previously in the media and a talented songwriter, I really don't see him having the wherewithal to lead a country with the complex problems that Israel's got, which has got no grounding in. I mean, you don't have to be a university professor but Lapid doesn't even have his matric. And you need a certain amount of depth. As I say, formal education is not the ultimate test, but it is some sort of education, some sort of indication of intellectual prowess. I just don't see how he's going to handle it, although he will have, of course, by then 2 years of experience as foreign minister if the government lasts that long. But I'm very skeptical as to Bennett's ability to function. You must remember, he's one of the smallest members of the coalition. At least 3 other parties have more, or 3 or 4 parties have more than he does, because he got 6 seats, or sorry, 7 seats in the current parliament, but one member peeled off and refused to support the government because of the reasons that I've just detailed. So he's only got really 6 supporters in a coalition where there are at least 3 or 4 parties who have more power than him, including a Victor Lieberman, who will be both finance minister, and his party will have the head of the finance committee, basically giving him a total monopoly over the financial dealings of the government, the budget and allocations and things like that. So Bennett's going to have a difficult time dealing with him if there are any disagreements. The same thing with many other parties who are at least as large or larger than him. So I don't see how he just hasn't got the leverage. And if he had been open about being willing to sit with Lapid, he wouldn't have got into the Knesset. He wouldn't have reached the minimum threshold of 4 seats. I saw a poll today that over half of the people who voted for him, which is over 3 of the seats that he won, over half the people said they would have voted differently if they knew that he was going to do this hookup with Lapid, which he swore on everything holy to him that he wasn't going to do. And so in many ways, this government is built up on a terrible hoax, much like previous governments. At least 2 previous governments were. The Rabin government, when they signed the Oslo Agreement, was in stark contradiction to Rabin's statements that he wouldn't deal with the PLO. And of course, the disengagement, which Arik Sharon opposed during the election. In fact, his opponent, Amram Mitzna, suggested unilateral withdrawal from Gaza. And Arik Sharon dismissed it as too dangerous. However, when he was in power, he adopted exactly the policy that he called people to vote against when he was running for office. So in both those cases, we know exactly what happened. There was overcrowding both in the cemeteries and in the trauma wards in hospital because of people who'd been killed or wounded by terror that resulted from that negation of that breaking of electoral prejudice. So breaking of electoral prejudice in such a blatant manner have never ended well either for the people who broke them or for the public in Israel.
Prof, can I just mention the only thing which maybe differs with that is the Shas party, because they joined in with Rabin, and a lot against their voters who are more right-wing inclined. And they did join the peace process and came under a lot of flack from their voters, but yet they kind of forgave them, and they retained their the amount of seats that they get in every election. It stays very stable.
Yeah, it's still, but they've risen lately somewhat, but there was a stage when they were in a very difficult position.
Yeah.
And they've never basically returned to the former glory. I mean, they were well into double digits at one stage, but they haven't done that well in recent elections. But the the ultra-Orthodox bloc altogether, I think, is something like 15 or 16 votes. I don't remember exactly, but something like that, 15 or 16 votes. And so that's more or less stable. But you know, I'm almost sure that if the elections take place again within the next 2 or 3 years, Bennett will be wiped out, I think. And that certainly seems to be what's reflected in polls at this stage. Because, you know, he will need some enormous success that will be directly credited to him to stay in politics. I remind you that in the first election in this round, there had been 4 elections. In the first one, Bennett's very surprising, he didn't get through the threshold.
Yeah, he didn't make the threshold. It's true.
The first one, I think it was in the March or April in 2019. I think for the first election of the 4 that we've just had, he didn't get through the election, and you know, it just shows you how tumultuous Israeli politics is. It's a real roller coaster. You know, one day you're out in the street, and the next day you're Minister of Defense, and now you're almost Prime Minister. So I mean, this is a really an amazing ride for Bennett, from being almost ousted from the Knesset to becoming head of the Israeli government. It's an extremely up and down of it, and but I certainly think many people are very angry with him. You know, if you look at social media here, you can see there's a tremendous amount of resentment and anger at what he's done, because you know, people thought they wouldn't have voted for him if they knew this is what he's going to do.
Les, can I just get a
Sure,
question
absolutely,
there?
absolutely.
Professor Sherman, what historically in Israel, people are not required by law to vote. Neither are we in the United States. I'm from New York. In some European countries, you are required by law to vote. And nevertheless, historically, Israelis turned out in huge numbers to vote. Now, over the last 20 or 30 years, what have been the statistics for Israeli participation in the Knesset elections? Have they stayed the same, very high, gone down, gone up? Have there been any variations?
Well, I'm very low to give you an exact answer, but I know that in Israel, you're right. Historically, it's been very high, you know, sort of around about the 70% mark. Recently, because of you know, the somewhat unendearing behavior of the government officials, it's dropped. But it's, you know, it's always, if I remember correctly, it's around about the 60% mark. Which is not too bad. What you know, people are very involved in politics in Israel. You know, there's news almost every hour on weekdays. When you ride in the bus, or used to, I don't know if it's still today, but when I used to ride in the bus, on the beep of the hour, the bus driver would turn up the volume so people in the bus could hear the news. And in some programs, you even have news every half hour. So people are very involved, and people take their politics very seriously. You know, fortunately, there hasn't been much political violence. Of course, we had the very unfortunate assassination of a prime minister here. But in principle, you know, you don't see a lot of violence. You don't see people being attacked. You don't see posters being torn down in a wholesale manner. You see a little bit of it, but not a great deal. You don't see opposing parties, headquarters being arsened or anything like that. So there still is a great deal of involvement in politics, but people are very aware and informed, at least in a shallow manner, as to what goes on. And the news is always very up to date, and it takes up a large portion of media time here.
Can I just ask you, what I find amazing is that you've got on the one side the head of Meretz, who's going, Nitzan Horowitz, who's going to be, I think, the health minister, but he was very pleased actually with the International Criminal Court, with the possibility of investigating Israel for war crimes and crimes against humanity. And Naftali Bennett fought in the IDF and is very strong advocate, especially when we had the latest terrible skirmishes with Gaza and all the rockets firing, and how he answered amazingly well on the world media. And Naftali Bennett was pretty strong, defending Israel. So you've got really from the two, but really polarized sides of the spectrum, somebody who, is quite okay with our soldiers being indicted for crimes against humanity. And then you've got the leader of the government who's the total opposite. So it seems it really is the both sides of the spectrum.
Yeah, it's like a car that's got two wheels pointing in different directions. They're both trying to go left and right at the same time. So it's rather difficult to avoid obstacles if that's the situation. Because you can't do, if you want to turn right, he'll pull you left, and if you want to turn left, he'll pull you right. But Nitzan Horowitz, who is head of the Meretz Party, as you pointed out, basically condoned the initiative to investigate war crimes by the IDF, which I think is outrageous. I think that I don't understand how anyone like that could be given a government position. Not only that, if you look at the history of Merav Michaeli, who's head of the Labour Party today, the party, by the way, of Yitzhak Rabin and Bar-Lev and Moshe Dayan, she was on army radio, by the way, a good number of years ago, who called on Israeli mothers not to send their sons to the army. She somehow expressed half-hearted regret about what she said, but these are the kind of statements that, in my opinion, are well beyond the pale for national leaders. And if you look at the Islamist party as well, which is also part, basically, you have this absurd situation today where a coalition of supposedly Zionist parties are dependent on the support of anti-Zionist parties in the Arab sector. So you have a really Orwellian situation here. If someone wrote a political novel about what's going on in Israel, it would probably be rejected by a publisher as being too far-fetched.
Sorry, can I just ask you on Merav Michaeli? I don't know if many of our listeners are aware, but her grandfather was Rolf Kastner from the infamous Kastner train. And it's very ironic in a way that she's been given the transport portfolio. Yeah. But can I get your insights into that? Because her grandfather was very, very controversial and remains very controversial. Saving with the Kastner train, but not telling the people back in Hungary. So the whole Kastner affair, it's a very, very controversial topic. Could I just get a bit of your take on that? Because she's now the leader of the Labour Party and she's going to be the Minister of Transportation.
Yeah, well, I don't think we should hold ancestry against her. I mean, there's the good enough reasons, current reasons why she shouldn't be in a position of power. And I think this, by the way, this is one of the greatest indictments of Naftali Bennett, because he's given people, like you mentioned, like Merav Michaeli, and people like the Meretz Party, who've basically haven't been able to get into positions of power for almost a decade. He's given them access to positions of power, because if you look at the political map, putting Netanyahu, the animosity towards Netanyahu aside, 80% of the vote went to right-wing parties. So the left wing is basically within the electorate being very, very marginalized, and people like Michaeli and people like Horowitz would never have been able to access power if Naftali Bennett had been true to his electoral pledges. And I think this is one of the biggest indictments against Bennett, is that basically what he's done. He's removed the obstacles from the left to get to power, which they would never have got on their own. And now they're certainly in a position of power. And the left is very good at hanging on to power. And so.
I'm going to give over time, but just before we ask Prof. Asher to give his view, can I just ask you, there was in the news today that that Netanyahu might hold like a snap primaries for the Likud, because there's a lot of people in the Likud saying that, you know, maybe it's time for Netanyahu to step down and to have a new leader of the Likud. Do you think this is going to be a possibility? And who, in your expert opinion, do you think might take over if Netanyahu does step down or primaries are held? Do you think there's a chance that there could be a new leader of the Likud?
Well, I think Netanyahu gave a very impressive speech today as the prospective head of opposition. And he talked about going into opposition in a very determined fashion and be a resolute opponent of the sitting government. So the way things look at the moment, I'm not sure that he'll step down. And I don't know who's really ready to challenge him. Because we saw what happened to Gideon Saar. Gideon Saar got 20%, 25% of the vote. Netanyahu won by a 70% majority. But if you ask who could be potential successors, in my opinion, two people come to mind. The one is Yuri Edelstein, who was Speaker of the Knesset and Health Minister following that. I think he might be certainly a possible candidate. I don't think he's got Netanyahu's stature yet. Certainly hasn't got his command on the international stage. But I think he certainly could be a serious contender. And the other one is Neil Barkat, who was he was a successful high-tech billionaire, and then he became mayor of Jerusalem. So I think he's got a certain amount of governmental experience, of course, on a different level. But those are the two major challenges that I think might follow Netanyahu. Whether they would take him on in a direct challenge if Netanyahu arranges primaries within the Likud, I don't know. And if they did, I'm not sure they have much chance of winning. The other challenger who's been promoting himself is Israel Katz, who's now finance minister. But I'm very unimpressed by Katz's performance. I really don't think that he could fill the position adequately. But there's certainly going to be a lot of chafing at the bit, especially if Netanyahu doesn't hold primaries. And I think it would be in his best interest to hold primaries as soon as possible, because I think he'd still have the sympathy of people who think he's been cheated out of his position. Because after all, you must remember, the Likud is the biggest party, almost twice the level of its nearest challenger, and Netanyahu is by far the most popular prime minister. And all the polls that were taken ask you who should be the prime minister, or who is best suited to fill the role. Netanyahu beat everyone by significant margins, and certainly beat Bennett by a lot.
Yeah. I was very fortunate to attend on Thursday night. My daughter had a role in organizing a Nir Barkat's event, where it started off with Netanyahu actually addressing the crowd via video. So I think Nir Barkat wouldn't stand against him. He wouldn't. I've got a very good feeling that he wouldn't, especially from that event and from.
I agree with you. I agree. I think you're right, and I think he more or less said so. He might be surreptitiously trying to test the waters, but it certainly wasn't an outright challenge to.
No, it wasn't. Yeah. Okay, we're going to open up Prof. Asher Matthias. You always have such wonderful comments and questions.
Thank you. First of all, Shavua and Hodesh Tammuz Tov to all of you. I'm delighted to meet you, Professor Sherman. And I can see that we have a balance here, 2 South Africans and 2 Americans, albeit in my case, a naturalized citizen. The other observation is when you started off by saying the significance of the day, immediately my thought went to our granddaughter Jacqueline Hanna's match on the soccer field this morning, She scored the winning one of the goals, 4-1, her team won, and assisted in 2. So that's significant for us. But to shift to the tectonic changes, they are tectonic only because they have been delayed and long deferred, long expected in coming. I think the other, before we get to specifics, never mind the fact that Lord Acton may have been correct when he said that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Eventually, in the case of Bibi, he overstayed his warm welcome and his early expectation. To just, you say you have a dim view of Bennett. Immediately my mind goes back to the Begin and Shamir eras. And I can tell you, in America, we were very, very uneasy when Menachem Begin assumed power after, of course, the longest period of labor prime ministers since the founding of the state. But he proved to be quite agile and able to hold on to power. And Shamir, also a terrorist in his time, managed to bring about some welcome changes. So I'm not ready to dismiss Bennett. What I do maybe see that eventual paralysis will ensue because of the various doctrinal changes that are included in the government, from extreme right to extreme left to, and of course the Arab dimension, which you have not broached yet, and we need to do that. So if there is cantankerousness and instability and a lot of distrust, the government may not last very long, in which case Lapid will never have a chance to be prime minister, just as Benny Gantz never had the chance to be Bibi's successor in the Likud array of power. Voting, democracy, there is a genius in democracy in that it permits the peaceful transference of power and a periodic change that is welcome. Again, I think there has been sclerosis in Bibi's government because it has stayed for so long. So I'm rather guardedly optimistic that change will come. The fact that we have, again, let's talk about this Arab dimension. It could be the Gordian knot that will be broken, just as Alexander did in the old days, to perhaps make Arabs, the domestic Arabs, less radicalized, to the extent that we continue to have this eruptions in Gaza and elsewhere, and attacks, as we mentioned in last week, inside Israel, as a fifth column emerges periodically to make us unsure about the future. The inclusion of Abbas, the good Abbas, in the government may presage a change that is welcome. That argument that we can lift the standard of living of the Arabs, the domestic Arabs, and then maybe eventually think about a final settlement of sorts. It's very, very difficult to conceive. I just got a question from a dear friend of mine in Toronto, also a professor, to outline for him my vision. He said, "Do you want the borders of 48?" I said, "No, and nor are the borders of 67. We have to adjust those borders, and we have to adjust the parameters to include, of course, if possible, to make it a Jewish state that will last into a millennium, another millennium." But we have uneasy here in America, at least, as to how we can square the circle when you have two competing and very emotional ideas to reconcile: Jewishness and democracy. I'm
Okay.
throwing this not for solutions, but really for more extensive thought. Bibi made a lot of mistakes. Of course, we don't have to mention, even in the Obama years, going behind our presidents back to play the game of Boehner, Speaker Boehner, and address the Congress, the United Congress, on the matter of Iran deal. But that I think it was wrong tactically and strategically, and ultimately may have soured a lot of Americans' views of his government. And I think we welcome, therefore, the change. I am bullish in the short run, at least.
Okay, well, let me just relate to some of the points that you said. You know, looking at Begin, Begin was inexperienced in government in a certain sense, although he did know a lot about Israeli politics. But you must remember that Begin won the election. Begin was, and unlike Bennett, who has got 5% of the Knesset, Begin was the largest party. And he won the election. It wasn't as if he came in as a small fraction, and Begin certainly didn't come in on the basis of violating his pledges to the election. So I think it's very difficult to compare Begin and Bennett. And again, we talked about corruption. You know, as I say, I'm not an uncritical apologist for Netanyahu, but I think it's very difficult to ascribe corruption to Netanyahu, even in these transparently trumped up charges against him. And, I can go into that if you'd like, but it's people, an array of lawyers, including Democratic lawyers like Alan Dershowitz, were pleading that the charges against him be dismissed because they've got no substance. The first one is that he received a little bit too much wine and cigars over an extended period. Really, if you want to see corruption, I'll give you an example of corruption. In South Africa, Ramaphosa, the president of South Africa, began his public life as a trade unionist. Today, he has a personal fortune of $250 million, So, and he didn't get that in his trade union salary. We're talking about corruption. And the second charge, where he's accused of trying to making a deal with the editor of Yediot Ahronot, which is ridiculous, because in the end he didn't accept the offer, and 43 other members voted for what the editor of Yediot Ahronot wanted, and there'd be no charges brought against them, even though they received favorable coverage in Yediot Ahronot. And the third charge is an unprecedented charge, not because I say so, because the head of the prosecution said this was an unprecedented charge. No one in no politician in any democratic country has been charged with corruption by trying to get good coverage. So the charges against him are patently false, and they're going to cause great damage to the Israeli judicial system, because if he is finally prosecuted and found guilty, half the country are going to believe that the justice system was used for political ends. And if he's acquitted, the other half is going to believe that the justice system was in his pocket. So I think it was a massive miscalculation to try and dislodge him by abuse of the legal system. As for the Arabs, this is an important point that you raised. But if you look at today's legal system, the Arab Party shouldn't be allowed to participate in the elections at all, because if you look at the Basic Law Knesset, one of the stipulations which calls for disqualification of participation of a candidate or of a party is if that you do not accept Israel, or you work against Israel being a democratic and Jewish state. And the Arab Party is quite blatantly are against Israel being seen as a Jewish state. And they say so in their platform. So basically, and they get disqualified by the Knesset, the Knesset committee. They appeal to the High Court, and the High Court overturns their disqualification. So it's really not a matter of opinion. You just have to read the law, and the law says you cannot participate if you oppose Israel being a democratic and Jewish state. They oppose. Not only that, many Arab politicians and parties have openly associated with Israeli enemies during times of war, like Hamas in the last round of fighting. So basically, these parties shouldn't be allowed to participate. And I really don't think it's a matter of the standard of living of the Arab parties. If you drive past an Arab village, you'll see huge houses, multi-story houses for one family. I don't mean multi-story apartments, multi-story one-family homes. But at least for the official statistics, the two segments of the population that have on the lowest rung of the socioeconomic ladder are the ultra-Orthodox and the Arabs. But not because there's systematic discrimination against them, but because of sociological parameters. They both typically have one breadwinner and large families, and that's is what impacts their economic status more than anything else. But in the Haredi sector, you don't see the kind of rampant crime and murder and violence that you see in the Arab country. That's a cultural characteristic which is present in the Arab society and not present in the ultra-Orthodox society. So I think we need to be a lot less politically correct, because I think it leads us astray. There is a certain inherent violence in the Arab society as you look across the Arab world. From the Atlantic Ocean through the Libyan desert and to the Persian Gulf. The regimes there are all backed by a force of arms. That's got nothing to do with whether they're rich or poor.
So they have a difficult position to accept the idea of a Jewish state,
yes.
in their midst. President Biden said it so well 2 weeks ago in his news conference when he was, I think he even volunteered that. He said, we will have peace when the neighborhood accepts the fact that Israel exists. And it's so ironic. The Palestinians are often seen as the more progressive part of the Arab world. They are even called, I've heard it being said, that they are the Jews of the Arab world because they live for so many generations among Jews and acquire a dynamism, a potential dynamism that can convert their society into one of the most progressive societies. If they were to demilitarize and defang their military apparatus and concentrate on civil improvement, civic improvement.
But that's secondary to them. You look at Gaza. Take Gaza for example.
Yes.
Why hasn't Gaza become the Singapore of the Middle East? Because as Shimon Peres wanted it to be. Why? What's stopping them? Israel has removed every remnant of Israeli presence, of Jewish presence there. They even uprooted graves because they couldn't leave them there. The only thing that were left intact were synagogues, which the Arabs promptly burnt down and desecrated. You know, they didn't have to do that, but they did it. They got help they left the high-tech greenhouses because in their preferences, not because I say so, because the facts say so. In their preferences, they care more about dismantling Israel than building their own state, and that's something that's inherent in their culture. I don't know if anyone's got the answer of how to unculturalize that from them. And that's why I think that making any compromises towards them is counterproductive, because the compromise just move the negotiating lines forward instead of negotiating on what they didn't have. Now they have what they've got. Now they move the negotiation point further for other things that they don't have. Sadly, I don't think that there's any consensual resolution to this conflict. There'll only be a coercive one. You were asking something also about America. One of the biggest failings, I think, of Netanyahu is that he hasn't concentrated on diplomacy as a strategic asset for Israel. I think, I've been preaching for years now that Israel should devote 1% of state budget to public diplomacy. 1% is well over $1 billion today. With $1 billion, you could, even if you leave the present personnel in state and in place, I don't think the substance is very good for Israeli public diplomacy.
That $1 billion is what Benny Gantz came to Washington to receive for the Iron Dome, by the way. $1 billion.
But I think we need a diplomatic Iron Dome. We need a diplomatic Iron Dome.
Yeah.
And why would any liberal support the establishment of a Palestinian state? I cannot understand that, because no one believes that it will not be yet another homophobic, misogynistic Muslim majority tyranny whose hallmarks will be gender discrimination against females, the harassment of homosexuals, the persecution of political. Why would any liberal support something that is the exact antithesis of the values that he proposed to cherish? And it's never been put that way. It's never been put that way. Israel has always tried to put forward a moderate face, but I think being moderate is a very poor negotiating tactic, because admitting that the other guy has a point is not a good way to win the argument.
I don't understand. Bibi gets blamed for gay initiatives?
No. I say if the Palestinians were to set up a Palestinian state,
yes.
if the Palestinians were to set up a state, it would be a homophobic, misogynistic, Muslim majority tyranny. Now, anyone who says they're a liberal, enlightened liberal, why would they support that? It goes against everything that they're supposed to cherish.
The way I think they're beginning to think about as they anticipate, I hope, eventual elections in Gaza and the West Bank and Judea, Samaria, is to have an international overseer to make sure that the process is above board, that it would be credible.
Professor, even if it's credible, and the Hamas win fair and square, as they won in Gaza, so the Hamas will win fair and square, and then you won't have what I said. You won't have a.
It would be the last time they would have an election.
No, well, okay. Even with Abbas, you don't have too many elections. He's now in his 12th year of his four-year term. So I don't think it's the rules of the game. It's something structural in the culture of these countries, or these societies rather.
And are they made coercively to vote, or is that
No.
required?
No, but the same thing. I'm not quite sure. I also had about, if I remember correctly, but I could stand to be corrected. But I believe that they also had around about 60%. Look at the election. No one claims that the elections that brought Hamas to power were unfair. No one claims that. And if Abbas were to run against Hamas, he'd lose. I mean, the only person who might beat Hamas is Marwan Barghouti, who's in jail for, I don't know, 25 life sentences for murder. You know, that doesn't really strike me as a good peace partner. And you know, it's not that, you know, where are you going to allocate land for a Palestinian state? I mean, you know, if you, I mean, I can't show it now because I didn't prepare it, but I can send you some graphic material that from the area designated for a Palestinian state, you control the whole of the heavily populated coastal plain. That means all the airports, including the only international airport and military airfields, the seaports and naval bases, vital infrastructure and systems and mechanisms like water conveyance, electrical power generation, and electrical power conveyance. There's just no way that 80% of the population and 80% of the commercial activity would be within range of weapons being used today from that territory. And by the way, every time Israel has given up territory, it's been used as a platform to attack it, whether it was in South Lebanon, whether it was in Gaza, whether it was in Judea and Samaria during the Intifada. And withdrawing from areas along our eastern border in the West Bank or Judea and Samaria would create, well, there's no reason to think that it wouldn't create a giant Gaza on the fringes of Greater Tel Aviv. You know, you'd make Netanyahu's Sderot by the sea. You know, I cannot understand why Israel's being pressured by people who are supposedly its ally to do this.
Prof, can I just show you? This is a map. It's a topographical map, and you actually see the mountain range. And I think this is, you see where Tel Aviv is, where Ben Gurion is, and it's actually quite unbelievable. It's like, you know, anybody with a hand-propelled rocket launch, you don't even have to have sophisticated rockets, can fire on Ben Gurion from.
Let me see if you can just hold pictures up to the screen.
It's actually quite an amazing map of, you know, what the West Bank is and how close it is to the coastal plain.
Yes.
Now, I don't know whether you can see this. Can you see this or no?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, if these photographs were taken from this point, which is just within the land designated for a Palestinian state, and I'll just show you. So it's not ideal. This is what Ben Gurion Airport looks like from there. This was taken with a civilian camera. I won't go through the whole thing, but I'll just show you one more picture of. Here's a picture of a plane taking off. I don't know if you can see the red circle there. That's the main. Anyway, you can see the main runway at Ben Gurion Airport from inside the Palestinian state. By the way, before.
Again, that proves the Jeffersonian adage as well, that to have democracy with no education is something that will never be. There is the option of a culture of respect, of dignity for opposition. It's something that cumulatively occurs in a people and through experience. And here they have had only assassinations and bombings, even among themselves. I mean, that's how they eliminate opponents. That is, and to create a one-party system. How is that different from a totalitarian system?
No, well, you saw what happened in Egypt. I mean, you know, for Israel, the replacement of the Muslim Brotherhood by the Morsi regime was very fortunate, but had nothing to do with smart Israeli policy. You know, up until recently, Israel's strategic position was improved tremendously by two events that Israel had nothing to do with. The one was the election of Trump instead of Hillary, which now the wheel seems to have turned back. But at least for 4 years, you know, we didn't have a inclement regime in the White House. And the other one was what happened in Egypt. Because if it wasn't Brotherhood, it'd still be in power in Egypt. We might be in a complete, yeah. So, you know, they're just so many. One of the unfortunate results of Israel, of the success of Israeli the security forces and army, is that it seems to have lowered the national adrenaline level, where people don't feel the danger and the fragility of the country. And therefore, there's this very irresponsible and loose talk about making territorial concessions that I feel make the country not only indefensible, but Shimon Peres wrote a book in 1977 called Tomorrow is Now, sort of a forward-looking book. And there he says indefensible borders generate almost compulsive temptation to attack Israel from all sides. And I think that's what's happening. Every time we've left territory, it's become a platform to attack us from. Look what's happening in Gaza. You know what? If in 2005, when Israel left Gaza, someone had actually predicted that the realities we'd be facing today are the realities that we are in fact facing, he would be dismissed as an unrealistic scaremonger, as a right-wing fanatic. You know, because they're the most formidable weapon they had was a mortar of 5 or a rocket of 5 kilometer range with a warhead of 5 kilometer range and a warhead of 5 kilograms of explosives. Now today they have missiles that can travel hundreds of kilometers and have a warhead of 200 kilograms. So if anyone had suggested that would be the situation, they would have dismissed him as an unreasonable fanatic. You know, never mind the tunnels and the kites and the drones. You know, every time the Palestinians observed some form of aggressive tactic, Israel developed a countermeasure where they had suicide bombings, so we put up a fence and checkpoints. So they developed rockets. So we developed Iron Dome. So they developed underground tunnels. So we developed $1 billion underground barrier. So now they've developed balloons and kites to burn the south. And they're now on the brink of developing effective drone capability. And it's only a matter of time until they develop even it's a crude cruise missile, which isn't ballistic, so that the Iron Dome can't intercept it. And they'll have biological or chemical warheads. That's going to happen. And in the final analysis, I'm sorry to say that they're either going to be Jews in the Negev or Arabs in Gaza, but there won't be both.
Yes, I would like to add something here to what you've all said. Land for peace is a formula that has never worked, ever. And the fact that it's repeated as a mindless, manic mantra within Israel or outside of Israel doesn't change that. It never worked. Furthermore, Israel is the size of New Jersey with a population density of Singapore.
Yeah.
And a few facts should be mentioned about the neighborhood in which Israel's living. Number one, in 1970, in Black September, my roommate, my final year in college, was there. I won't name him. He was from an Arab family that went from Jaffa to Tulkarm in 1948. He himself said, no one forced us, we chose to leave. And from Tulkarm to Amman in 1967, I said, did anyone terrorize you? I said, no, we just didn't want to live under Israeli authority. Then he told me what happened in Amman. with Black September, King Hussein did it the Arab way.
Yeah.
And 40,000 Palestinians were slaughtered. He said the king's troops were firing on our residential neighbors. That's the way Arabs and Muslims do it. Furthermore, Zia al-Haq, the later president of Pakistan, was there with a Pakistani military contingent. They specialize in mass murder. In 1971, in East Pakistan, mostly Muslim, but of different tribal origin than the West Pakistanis, they wanted independence from Pakistan. Within 1 year, the West Pakistani army engaged in a mass, 1 year, 3 million people, most of whom were Muslims. It didn't stop until the Indians set in an army under the command of General Jacobs, a Jew, I think he's still alive, to rescue them. Now I'm just getting warmed up. In Lebanon, when the Black September, yes, please, Professor. You were going to say, you're the speaker.
Actually, what you mentioned about Black September, the Palestinians, the Palestinians actually were swimming the Jordan River to Israel to get away from the slaughter.
Yes,
of
that was my
Jordanians.
next point. Dr. James Zogby came to talk at Swarthmore College, where I got my BA. I was there from 1974 to 1978. And you had these second-rate intellectuals from third world countries, mostly with snotty rich kids who spoke of revolution, but that would go out the window when they were back home with daddy and getting their nice, cozy, but they didn't have to work. And he was talking, and I knew this. So I asked him, when did you last beat your wife question? That's a classic legal setup. I said, Professor Zogby, would you say something about why the PLO fighters fleeing from the wrath of King Hussein's Bedouin, Chechen, and Pakistani army fled over the Jordan River into Israel? He got very uncomfortable because you're not supposed to know that. He didn't know what to say because they know perfectly well they wouldn't have their testicles, penises, and heads cut off. Let's get to that. My son-in-law, a third-generation Polish military man, before he came to Israel in 2015, was with the Polish embassy in Beirut. They were involved in arms sales. The Polish have small arms industry to Lebanon. He was involved in monitoring the press there. He said the following incident happened in Zarqa in northern Jordan, which no one ever heard about. He said there were protests against King Hussein. What did King Hussein do? This is just a few years ago. He sent his Bedouin army, this is now, up to Zarqa, took a number of people from the town, cut off their ears and noses. That was the end of it. No one ever heard about it. This is routine. When the Egyptian army was in Yemen, they used poison gas. That was, I think, the 1960s. When the PLO got to Lebanon to destabilize it, a couple of 100,000 people went up in smoke. And when Iran and Iraq went at it from 1980, how many years? 1 million under the lunacy of Saddam Hussein, a psychopathic mass murderer, and Khomeini. Incidentally, he's not Persian. He's an Azeri. This is a very important point. When dealing with people, you always want to know what is their religion, what is their ethnic background. Stalin was a Georgian. Napoleon was from Corsica. Khomeini and Khamenei are not Persians, they're Azeris. Only 50% of the population in Iran is Persian, the rest are other minorities. It's very much like with the Assad regime, where 10% of the population are Alawite, and most of the rest are Sunnis. Also in 1982, when there was a Wahhabi uprising against Assad, he sent in his brother, and they slaughtered 10,000 people. To talk about land for peace is not only wrong, it's criminally insane. And I come back to a point that I've mentioned with Les before. No, Professor Sherman may have noticed this. In Israel, in Israeli society, you never take responsibility for, especially men, and in the Arab and Muslim world in general. If you take responsibility and say you're sorry for a mistake is severely punished in the Arab world. You never take responsibility for anything. Everything is inshallah. And in Israel till today,
the other side of that is that you never, you always, you never what was going to say? If to save face, the whole syndrome.
Right. You're from
That's the other
Greece, so
side.
you know about saving face.
Yeah.
Like we were discussing the other day with Yitzhak Kerem, your friend, who'll also be
Yeah.
speaking in a few weeks here, that you can't lose face, so that nothing can ever change because you can't admit anything's ever wrong.
Right.
And even you can't even pretend. You know, in Japan, saving face may mean with Minamata disease, the executives of the corporation get up and bow on stage, and then one goes commits Japanese ritual suicide because, yes, I'll admit it, then I can't live, so I kill myself. That wouldn't happen in Israel. Mach patli ata chayav and magiali ata Hashem ata chayav. Meaning, what do I care? You're responsible. I didn't do anything. Like recently with the Maroon incident, the police chief said, I'm responsible but not guilty. It's not part of the national character. You never, ever, and in the Jewish world in general, and here I get to my schlemiels and suit shtick, Les has heard it before. In the 25 years of the Oslo death process, it wasn't a peace process that failed. It was a death process that almost succeeded. Even, what was his name, that writer? His son was killed in Lebanon. Not that Amos Alone, the other one, his friend. I saw him on US television. What was the other? Yeah, he's very famous here.
Glassman.
Right. I have to give him credit. He appeared, I was visiting my parents at the time in New York. He appeared on National some show, and he said something, and I said, did you drink something? I thought to myself, did you smoke something? He said something no one ever says in Israel. He said, we were friars and fools. We were lied to from the beginning by our Palestinian, I put that in quote because there are no Palestinians. There are Arab tribes, clans, and families in the land of Israel. And the professor's famous is correct. Most of them are descended from Jews who never left. That doesn't help us at the moment, though. He said, we on the left, we were suckers, fools, and friars big time. They lied to us from the beginning. The Jew was the friar, the sucker. They never meant one.
The phalangists you're talking about, the phalangists.
What I'm talking about, Lebanon. I'm talking about the Palestinian so-called peacemakers with a phony peace process, with a PLO that had already been nothing and nobody in Tunis who were brought in. And I know Arabs who said, where did you bring in these guys from Tunis from? We have our own clans and families and tribes and Hamulot. Who invited them in to boss us around? We didn't ask for that. Now I come to every schlemiel in a suit in every so-called major Jewish American organization. This is a chutzpah of New York Jews to even think there's such a thing as a major American Jewish organization. It's Jonas Schimmel's and Lohman's and Bloomingdale. There are no major American, only in the minds of American Jews. All the people who took those photos with Abdul Rauf al-Khudbi Husseini, the Egyptian from Alexandria, euphemistically known as Yasser Arafat. Arafat's a mountain near Mecca. Mentioned in Surah 2 of the Quran. On your way to Mecca, go and say certain prayers at Arafat. Not one ever with the big mouths and the big egos, with all the Jewish blood on their hands, said, I'm sorry, took any responsibility. Because in the Jewish world, Professor Erwin Corey, world's leading experts, you never lose face. Like in Greece, Asher, with the Greek Orthodox Church with their Jew hatred. Not one of them. We moved here in 1992, April 1st. The phony peace, the death agreement was signed in September 13th, 1993. The bombs started blowing up on the buses and the cafes immediately. And I'll conclude my rant now with a comment that I read on a very anti-Israel website, which got it right in one sentence. Professor Michel Chossudovsky in Toronto, I don't know, it's a Trotsky, whatever it is. If you had a bad day, it's Israel's fault, America's fault, and England's fault. But one of his essayists got it right in one sentence, cut through all the BS. Israel withdrew from Gaza, the rockets kept falling, and the left collapsed. Period equals MC square, which makes people wonder, if the left collapsed, how come the bad guys with the deeper levels in the structure of Israeli society in our, as Eisenhower said military industrial complex. He wanted to include congressional. His family wouldn't do it. He wrote the speech himself. In our military industrial Knesset complex, somehow whoever you vote in the deeper levels of the system, like in your programming a computer, it's the same old stuff. This is a very good question. That's what happened. Israel withdrew from Gaza. The rockets kept falling. The left collapsed. Now I'll conclude my comment. Isaac Herzog's the new president. Is that right?
Yes.
I was there. I wasted money from 1992 to 2011 being a member of the Foreign Press Association Israel. Aside from the fact that they're low IQ Jew and Israel haters, these are not media in the sense that you would think of. These are corporate fascist mouthpieces. With most of them, it's not complicated. I work for Reuters in New York, CBS Television, National Network News. Where's the money coming from? Who's paying the salaries? And it's not very, you will do what you're told. If you don't do what you're told, you'll be told on Friday, don't come back on Monday. And what's the government? What's the organization? What's the corporation that controls the so-called media? And you already know what they're going to say. So I was there. I was still wasting time. That was 2005. We had the nice coffee clutches at the King David Hotel, and we'd have speakers. We had a lot of very prominent speakers. That day was Isaac Herzog. And he was saying, well, you know, I come from a family from a Holocaust, and this is very difficult for us. What we did, sure, it's treason. It should be difficult for you. And no one ever apologized for that, compensated the fate. People went insane. People had nervous breakdowns. People died of cancer. But in Israel, no one's ever responsible for anything. That's state-sponsored terrorism against your own people by your own government. And that day, the first rockets hit Eilat. And there was this uncomfortable silence. Did anyone take responsibility? Has anyone really compensated the families? No. I'm waiting until we can go back to Gush Katif to rebuild and plant it bigger and better. Unfortunately, especially with Jews, the Jewish capacity for pretending, lying, and make-believe, you would think it's the opposite, like the canary in the cave. You have a sense of when things are bad. Sometimes it's the opposite of that. To dull the pain before I'm killed, I'll pretend to myself everything's fine. Like the Hungarian Jews, there was a reference before. People came to them, I'm not referring to Kastner, and said, we've escaped from Auschwitz, you have to leave. It's no, that's conspiracy theory, you're crazy. There is no, even as late as 1944, no, everything's fine. So Israel, if we survive the self-destructive behavior, Israel's been severely weakened. Land for peace, land for peace, land for peace. That's crap. It's not real. Even the Quran. Remember, I wrote my book, Cracking the Quran Code, God's Land, Torah, and People Covenants with Israel in the Quran and Islamic tradition under the supervision not of secular academics, not of Israeli academics, Muslims, Sheikh Palazzi and Sheikh Abdulaziz Bukhari, who's no longer alive, the head of the Uzbeki Muslim community in Israel, about 5,000 Uzbeki Muslims who came here for several hundred years as religious pilgrims to be near Jerusalem. The Quran says, not like that brain-dead Shimon Peres, well, you make peace with your enemies. What a moron. The Quran says you make peace with your enemies who what? Inclined to peace. Only a Jew would talk like that. You make peace with your enemies. How do I know there's a God? We shouldn't be here. Nothing makes any sense here. Nothing functions here. With all the fascist mistakes, catastrophes, all the self-destructive behavior, we shouldn't be here. Another point, money is not the problem. Even if you took 1% and spent $1 billion on public relations, you have to have a vision and a plan what you want to relate. More coffee served and more wallpaper doesn't do the trick. That's why when I was at CBS Television National Network News in the fall of 1990, right, a couple of months in the archives department, people said to me there, we can't compete with the BBC. We have more money, we have more everything, but we don't have their creativity. Yeah, because as you didn't go to Eton, Harrow, and Oxford and Cambridge, and either you got the talent or you don't. Money doesn't solve, nothing problem having money. But if you don't have the creativity and the talent, the money won't help. I've said too much already. Now back to our guest, Professor Sherman. And Dr. Glassman, there's one doctor and two professors here. I don't have any titles except Mr. That's all I wanted to say.
Well, I think we've more or less exhausted the topic. I think I don't think we should bear down too much on our viewers by repeating things. So perhaps we can.
Yeah.
Well, I have a question for Professor Sherman. I meant to ask before this speaker's corner in Hyde Park filibuster. Why did Naftali Bennett do what he did? Why didn't he keep? What was he threatened or blackmailed? Well, he like you said, the Likud is the huge party, and there's huge support for the right-wing parties, 80% of the population. What got him not to keep his promises? Money, threats? Where did this come from?
Look, he doesn't need money. He's a pretty wealthy guy himself, so I don't think money had anything to do with it. I think more or less is what you see is what you get. I think he just saw an opportunity to become prime minister. I mean, he also has a certain amount of resentment towards Netanyahu, so that might have just added to the impulse. But I think he just saw that this was a chance for him to get into the prime minister's office, something he's been dreaming of for a few years. I don't think it's much more complicated than that, but perhaps I'm wrong. Most people say he planned this before, that his negotiation with Netanyahu setting up a right-wing government was merely a ruse, and that he planned to set up a government with Lapid in the first place to get rid of Netanyahu, because basically Netanyahu was a big obstacle for everyone. As long as Netanyahu was in power and difficult to remove, you never had a chance of getting in. So this was a constellation, a fleeting constellation, which they thought they might be able to exploit to get rid of Netanyahu. I think that's the most feasible explanation. Get rid of Netanyahu, we see how the pieces fall.
Yeah.
You dismiss the charges of corruption right away, but the abuse of power you didn't discuss at all. The fact of muzzling the press, even in recent days, threatening politicians, not he himself, but his so-called goons around him to, I don't know, how do you see his circle and his exercise of power or misuse of power?
I don't know, when people say misuse of power, there was certain pressure on people who in my opinion, blatantly violated their electoral pledges. They must expect some blowback. But I think a lot of the complaints against Netanyahu, in my opinion, are imagination. They're just figments of the press's animosity. I mean, muzzling the press. 99%, no, what I'm exaggerating. 80% of the mainstream media is anti-Netanyahu. The Yediot Ahronot, Ma'ariv, the English press, the press is anything but muzzled. There's one paper which is staunchly pro-Netanyahu, which is Israel Hayom, perhaps. But and on TV there's a minor channel 20. But in principle, the dominant theme of the mainstream media is anti-Netanyahu. I mean, I don't know why people think that the press is being muzzled. And Netanyahu is correct. When they say, whenever the right wing express their views somewhat stridently, they say it's incitement. And whenever the left does, they say it's freedom of speech. There were really dreadful things said about Netanyahu and his family in the protesting, and so it's hardly raised a ripple. Here, any strident criticism of the right is immediately associated with threats on their lives. And how can you say that? And it's incitement. I mean, I don't know what your predilections of politics in America are, but you can see people in America got Pulitzer prizes for fiction on Russian collusion and Iranian connivance. With, there was nothing there. They just used up a huge amount of time and resources to chase off the demons that were never there. And the same thing here. I mean, you look at the three charges against Netanyahu. The one is he got too much wine and cigars from a rich man. We still, but no one's ever really pointed to, what the quo was for the quid for the quid pro quo. What did Netanyahu give for in exchange for? There's been no real public attention on that. It's not unclear. He helped some guy to get a visa, which is hardly in the United States. But there's no claim that he embezzled public funds or channeled public funds to cronies. The other one, the second charge, as I said before, about getting positive coverage in exchange for toning back the circulation of a rival newspaper, nothing came of that. And Netanyahu brought down the government partially because of that. Whereas 43 other members of Knesset actually voted to curtail the publication of the rival newspaper and got positive coverage from the editor of the Yediot, which pushed for that legislation, and nothing happened to them. And the third charge is that he got positive coverage in exchange for government decisions as Minister of Communications. These went through a bureaucratic process which was approved at every stage. And no one anywhere in the Western world has been charged for corruption, for getting positive coverage. So I really don't know, why
but
people
it reflects well on Israel, very, very well, the fact that his own appointed Attorney General is proceeding with the prosecution. Doesn't that prima facie shows that there may be something there after all?
Well, one of the state prosecutor himself, Shai Nitzan, admitted that there was no precedent.
It was appointed by Bibi Netanyahu, right?
No, you're talking about
Mandelblit.
The Attorney General.
Mandelblit.
Mandelblit.
He's the Attorney General, and then there's the Chief Prosecutor. But the Chief Prosecutor was basically the front
used to be his erstwhile friend, right?
Used to be what?
He used to be his erstwhile friend, or Bibi's friend. Weren't they collaborators?
That's the Attorney General, yes.
Yes.
But within the organizational culture, it would be very difficult for him not to go with Bibi's adversaries. But the state prosecutor, who's just below the Attorney General, and who was in charge of formulating the indictment, admitted that this was a unprecedented charge. And he said, why? Just because he's prime minister, we shouldn't have a precedent. There was very harsh criticism of the prosecutor's office by the controller. There was a former judge who was a controller of the prosecution, and she resigned in protest against what was going on there. She said that the people, not because of Netanyahu, but in general, she said the people in charge of the prosecution were not fit for their jobs. I think it's very, very worrying that if you go into the facts and you look at it, I'm not sure that they can find some contorted way to say that this was an illegal action. But to prosecute a prime minister, you need things to be clear cut. There need to be clear violations of the law. You don't have to invent new infractions so you can prosecute the prime minister. And that's what happened here. People have been inventing crimes for things that fit the action of Netanyahu. And he's not the only one. There's selective enforcement here. Many people many government figures got favorable coverage and weren't charged for prosecution, even though they put in adverts in some of the papers. They'd been given given favors to the channel owners. There's clear-cut selective enforcement here, and I think it's going to damage the credibility both of the prosecution and the police and the judiciary here if he's indicted, and if he's not indicted as well. I mean, there was a whole story of extorting state witnesses, the harsh conditions they were kept in, threatening to reveal all sorts of secrets to their family if they didn't testify against Netanyahu. There's a can of worms here. It's really far from a clear-cut case, and that's why a whole battery of top U.S. attorneys called on the Attorney General to drop the charges because there's really nothing in them.
You know, would you agree with me that even in the worst possible scenario with Bibi's cases, it doesn't pale in comparison to what Trump is expected to face, you know, the kind of abuses, and now with the press that reveals that he directed his Attorney General to look into the cases of seating Congress people, never mind the press, but also our own congressmen, you know, and their families. Such abuses of power that will be revealed in the coming weeks and months that will keep the legal profession occupied into many years.
No, I'm sure if they applied the same standard to Democratic presidents, they could find the same sort of stuff. There's just a selected application of sanctions here. That's all. I mean, I think the Democratic Party's worst nightmare is that Trump should come back and compete in the next election. So I think what they're doing is trying to preempt his return to politics.
Okay.
Prof and to both profs, I just want to mention something, and I think we need to wrap up. Something that is absolutely unbelievable, and Prof Sherman, you're so right. You know, they started the investigation without written consent from the Attorney General, from Mandelbelt. And I think that was something which is unforgivable. They never had written consent to start the investigation against Netanyahu. And I think in any court of law, you know, that they would have dismissed the cases because they said it was hearsay, but that was a major big deal. And what's very upsetting is that the media didn't really run with the story because it ran against their narrative.
Exactly.
So, but that was a big deal. How can you start an investigation without the written consent from the Attorney General on such an important issue? So, it just, as you said, there are many issues here that, and the sad thing is that those that ran against Netanyahu, they ran because they didn't want him to be in power. It's not on a philosophy or you're running for, you know, Israel always was in the Labour Party, in the Likud. It was what we believed in. Here they're believing that Netanyahu shouldn't be the prime minister. That's a pretty weak way to run a government or to run a coalition. That's my take. Anyway, Prof, I want to thank you so much. You know, you've enlightened us, and your clarity and your perspective and your expertise, it's been absolutely unbelievable. We've been like glued to every word that you've said. But you know what? You really have you've shown us an amazing perspective from your professional, from your professionality. You really have shown what's going on here, and you've kind of cleared up what's happening, and we do understand the situation much better after tonight. So we really want to thank you. Really, we are so grateful to you for your very precious time on this very momentous day that we're facing today. And I just hope that the leaders that they will consult with you, because you have got so much to contribute to Israel and to governments and to. I wish more people would take your salient your expert advice, really. So thank you very much.
I don't know if you mentioned that the professor combines the soft power and the hard power of sciences, the political science and geological, I understand. Is that so?
Yeah, geophysics, yeah.
Physics, I mean, I take my proverbial kippah off to you.
Thank you so much, Prof. And we wish you all a Shabbat Tov. And we really are extremely grateful to you. God bless. Bye. Be well. All the best. Bye, Prof.